Today we're going to have a panel on youth rising. So we have four panelists, Jibril, Mackenzie, Rachel, and Isaac. And so today we're going to be talking about how we can introduce youth into these movements of, urban agriculture and restorative agriculture. And so why don't we welcome the panelists on stage? Oh my God. Yeah. It was rough. All right, so we do only have an hour, and since there are four panelists, we would like to keep the discussions short. But we are trying to do things a little differently here. Instead of going one by one and presenting each person's platform or program, what we're going to try to do is have an open discussion to try to facilitate this collateral discussion instead of having pillars. And so why don't you guys just start off and introduce yourselves and what you guys do?
Hi, my name is Isaac Vergun. I'm from Beaverton, Oregon, and I'm a youth climate activist. I'm involved in the federal lawsuit Juliana versus United States. And I've also worked with the United Nations organization Plant for the Planet. And it's been a really great experience working with youth across the world and in the United States locally, just getting a plethora of a whole bunch of different perspectives on the climate movement has been very enriching and has really helped me become a better climate activist and really focused me.
I'm Mackenzie. I run a campaign called Herbicide Free Campus. It's a campaign to ban herbicides at schools. Started it at UC Berkeley and then expanded it to the UCs. We got all the UCs to temporarily ban glyphosate, and now they're deciding, we'll find out soon, about a permanent ban on glyphosate. And worked with groups to get all herbicides out of every school in the state of Hawaii, every public school. And yeah, just now working on expanding the campaign to more schools across the country.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel. I've been in the food climate-ish movement for almost 9 years now. And I started when I was 12 teaching kids about the importance of food and advocating for mandatory GMO labeling in Canada. I'm from Toronto. And that has really expanded. I formed Kids Right to Know 7 years ago now. And we're a nonprofit organization focusing on teaching kids about the importance of healthy eating and the impact that food has on the world around us. And I've been so honored to have the platform that I've been able to spread awareness, and I've learned so much. And in previous years, I've been working more on the issues between climate and our food system and how we can move forward in a regenerative way that benefits us as consumers, benefits farmers, and benefits our planet at the same time.
Peace, everybody. My name is Jibril. I just want to say that this is stolen land, So let's recognize the indigenous people of this land that came before us, that lost their lives at the hands of the state of California, at the hands of pioneers and people who came here during the gold rush and took their lives. So let's take a moment just to acknowledge them in a moment of silence for those people. Thank you. I also want to say that this is year 400 since the first African was brought from Africa, was stolen and trafficked from Africa and enslaved in the United States. So this is year 400 as of August 6th. We're in that. And then this is also year 527 of colonization, right? Christopher Columbus came to the island of Hispaniola 527 years ago, and the Taino people lost their lands and their livelihoods during that time, right? So before I introduce myself, I wanted to say those things so we can give you a political and historical context of where we are. And so I'm a founder of Black Earth Farms, which is a Black and Indigenous farming collective that's trying to restore land and indigenous foodways and livelihoods back to African and indigenous people in the East Bay. But so far we've expanded to Los Angeles and are doing other international work. Some of y'all heard from Minka this morning. So right now we're focusing on our community-supported agroecology program, where we're harvesting and delivering food to families in need, and also people who just want access to chemical-free food that was produced ethically and with a higher than organic standard. And we're also focusing on our healing programs, right? Because as we're activated and we're doing this work of decolonization, it can be very taxing, and we're trying to heal at the same time through traditional healing practices like cupping, acupuncture, doing massages and stuff like that. So that's been a journey in itself. So thank you.
So since this is geared toward an open discussion, no one has to answer in particular, but what issue would you say is most prevalent for youth? Like how can kids start to learn more about agriculture and maybe learning where their food comes from, as most families don't have parents that support that kind of lifestyle?
So another global context of what's going on. Yeah, you could talk later. It's good. So another global context of what's going on is there's 1.5 billion youth on the planet age 15 to 25. So historically, right, youth have been the people leading all of the social movements that have actually made change throughout the world. So if we look at the Black Panther Party, which was created in Berkeley and operated mostly in Oakland and had international chapters and locally, who had the People's Free Food Program and the People's Free Breakfast Program, right, which were their most prominent things that they did. Their average age was 17, right? And so thinking about that and thinking about how youth have been on the front lines of the movements, and thinking about how our elders can actually transition us resources, and how we can incentivize our elders to give us access to resources that we may not have as youth, since we're not established in our careers, we're not established in enterprises or doing anything that has like really gotten us to a level of accessing all of the resources that are available. So I think a big thing is we can talk to our elders and try to organize our elders to transition us some resources.
I think there is a disconnect between our food and what we put in our mouth and what we understand as the effect on the world around us. When we think about food, we don't think about seeds, we don't think about the earth, we don't think about climate change, and yet it's so all interconnected. And I think more that now than ever, we are looking for information. As you're saying, we are looking for resources, we are looking for people to show us where to find the right information that is factual, that is not, in today's day and age, fake news. And in this wake of the youth climate movement, more now than ever, we're becoming aware of the food choices that we're making. We're seeing plant-based diets on the rise. We're seeing people moving away from GMOs. We're seeing people move towards regenerative food systems, and that's just a trend that continues to happen, but we also need to aid it, and we also need to educate people and go into our own homes and go into our own communities and go to people where they are. I mean, the reality is that we continue to come to conferences like this, which are so incredible and so amazing to be surrounded by like-minded people who understand the issues. But then we go back home and so many people still don't know about the problem. So many people still can't even find food that is affordable or don't have regenerative opportunities in their communities. And so we need to take the messages that we learn here and not just forget them when we go home, but also learn how we can bring these back home and learn how we can be a part of the solution and be active in our own lives, because it's important to have the knowledge, but it's even more important to share it.
And I feel like a huge part of this is showing kids that there can be jobs within these fields, and it doesn't have to just be a passion project on the side, because when you're in high school and you're in college and you're so focused on getting a job after college, you're just gonna go into whatever you can to support yourself. So we need to work on teaching people and providing more opportunities to show people that this can be a livelihood and it doesn't just have to be a passion project on the side. And a lot of that, if you're trying to be a farmer, is access to land, and that's a huge issue right now. And just in general, I think climate change is the biggest issue in the minds of youth, and we have to work on building that bridge between all of these other issues and showing people that pesticides is connected to climate change and making those connections, and just thinking about pesticides and how that relates to youth. Like, we're the ones that are going to be dealing with these consequences, you know? And I mean, we're even still seeing traces of DDT in our rain, in women's breast milk, and that chemical has been banned for a lot of years. And so we need to stop the use of these other toxic chemicals yesterday. And so we need to continue, though, to make connections to everything that everyone else is working on, and to figure out how to support each other, so that when we do go back home, we're not just stuck working on these same issues alone, but we're really actively building a movement every day of young people and older people, of everyone together. And I think one thing a lot of times is, like, my parents' friends will say, you know, oh, this is so inspiring, the work you do is awesome, and thank gosh that someone's doing something because we messed up. But it's like, no, like, you need to also do this work with us, and we need to be doing it together, because it's not fair for younger generations to carry that burden all on our own. But I think we have accepted that we're taking the torch and running with it, but we're going to all need to be doing it together.
Adding on to what Mackenzie said, I think personally, how to like a lot of youth that I've been talking to at my school and just on the streets, that climate change is one of the most important things that they're really concerned about. And the fact that so many things intertwine with climate change, environmental racism, and the food chains and the way our food's produced, and pesticides, and algae blooms, like everything is so intertwined with climate change and youth at the same time. Unfortunately, since we are the ones who are going to be needing to come up with solutions to these problems that were created not by us, it's also brought us together and made us way stronger and more resilient. Youth have had this opportunity for like the past 30 years of being the catalyst, about being the people who create the change. The youth have been the forefront of so many movements, of the most significant movements in the United States history, and this is just another one of these movements that the youth really need to step up on, because we're inevitably the only people who can fix this situation. So that's something I've been really passionate about, and something that's really been on the front of my mind and the front of the mind of all my peers.
So now that we have addressed the issue of lack of knowledge or sharing, how can we introduce this sort of curriculum into like schooling or like community building projects like community gardens? Jibril, I realize that you do foodscaping, which is sort of turning non-used land in between like curbs and whatnot, and turning them into food healthy boxes.
Okay. So I think that a lot of the times we have to be educating each other as youth too, because a lot of the times the school systems is not going to tell us that they're poisoning us with the food that they're putting in our schools, right? So the school is putting Doritos and hot Cheetos and processed, foods in our school that's poisoning kids, causing ADHD, learning disabilities, right? And so looking at that, it's like the system that's oppressing us is not going to tell us that it's oppressing us. So we have to organize amongst ourselves and get educated amongst ourselves. So that's the first thing that we can do. The second thing that we can do is just move forward, and move forward as a unit once we're organized. And that'll actually be able to enact widespread change, because we can't enact widespread change as individuals, but Yeah, and then to address what you were saying again is that a lot of the work that of foodscaping and transforming land and guerrilla farming is entwined with what Mackenzie and what y'all are doing, right? And, about mitigating pesticide usage and stopping the climate from warming and the oceans and sea levels from rising. So, you know, training people, training groundskeepers, training students how to actually farm land in organic ways is going to stop the same people who were spraying pesticides and the institutions who buy the pesticides from spraying the pesticide. So it's like a huge community-based and organizational process that needs to happen, but it's going to require that youth get organized amongst ourselves first before we rely on the system of oppression to get organized and help us out.
I couldn't agree with you more on everything that you just said. And I think, again, it does start from an education and information space where we all have to educate each other. We all have to work collectively. I was speaking in a school last year, and I was talking about seed saving. And one of the girls in the audience raised her hand and said that she didn't realize she could save the seeds from the tomatoes she had eaten and plant them. And that really opened my eyes to how people are just disconnected with the seed and the idea of preserving nature from these corporations and from destruction. And so I think it does come from a place where we do have to get connected with nature again and understand that, and going into schools and being able to talk to young people. And I do think that we also need to come at it from a policy and legislation place as well. Because I think as much as community work is so incredible and we need more community work, we also need government help, and we also need policy help and legislation help and resources, and we do need to collaborate with elders, as you were mentioning. This isn't just a single generational issue. We're all in this together. We are all walking this earth together, and at the end of the day, every single one of us in this room and in this movement have the same goal of protecting our earth for generations to come. So we need to work together in that section where we have people working on advocacy and legislation and policy, where we're trying to get curriculum to cover these issues, because if we don't have schools teaching it, we can't reach every single school in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. But if we can get legislation to say that you need to teach this Kiss the Ground curriculum, which is out there, or you need to talk about regenerative agriculture and use these resources and give kids a chance to understand about nature and understand why it's important, then we can make real change.
And for our campaign, in addition to training groundskeepers on how to transition to organic lawn care maintenance, we're really trying to change the way that people look at landscapes and really looking at weeds and like what is considered beautiful and why do we have these aesthetic standards and what's wrong with planting food. And before Jibril had started Black Earth Farms, he was part of the guerrilla gardeners at Berkeley. We were classmates together at Berkeley and have been friends and working on this for a really long time. And him and his friends would plant food at Cal's campus where there's over 30% of students are food insecure, and he'd plant food, and then groundskeepers would go and rip it up, and that happened over and over again. And so a big part of this work is educating, talk to your groundskeepers and say, hey, we want food to be grown here, why not? When so many students here are hungry, and there's students that are committed to maintaining this space, why not grow food? And we can do that at our schools, at our parks, at our churches, everywhere, as long as you find a group that's committed to taking care of the space, which we all should be doing. We shouldn't all be saying this is a groundskeeper's job and this is their job. If we're all sharing the space together, it should be all of our responsibility to take care of it. And one thing that we do at the UCs at Berkeley is we have working days where the groundskeeper now will go to the student that's leading the movement there and say, hey, we need 50 students to come on Saturday and help us weed for 5 hours, and we'll get professors to give them credit, and then we're all weeding together for a Saturday, and it's really beautiful because, how often do we get to acknowledge and interact with our groundskeepers, and it's really awesome because they're super proud of the spaces that they take care of, and they want to be able to share that with people, and out of anyone, they're the ones that are the most exposed to pesticides, right? Like if you've heard of the trial, Dwayne Lee Johnson versus Monsanto, the groundskeeper who got cancer and sued Monsanto. These groundskeepers and farm workers are the ones that are the most exposed, so we should help them take care of this space so that they don't have to do it alone. I forget where I was even going with that, but I was just saying, like, a huge part of this is engaging students. And like, I work with a 5th grade class in Sacramento, and they started a pesticide congress to get rid of Roundup across the Sacramento Unified School District. And I didn't even know what a pesticide was in 5th grade, and these students are teaching the superintendent about beneficial bugs. Shout out to Ron, where are you? Beneficial bugs? Yeah, you can talk about beneficial bugs. But super awesome. So I think engaging kids is the future.
On the topic of getting the youth more educated on these topics, in Portland, I know that we've passed an ordinance recently of incorporating climate science into the schools, into the public school system, PPS. And at first it was really difficult getting the legislation through. We had old textbooks saying, and refuting climate change, saying it didn't exist or it wasn't such a concern. And in my school district, there was a small paragraph in our textbook saying, climate change is this, but it's nothing too big. It's only concerned about sea level warming. It wasn't anything too important. And since climate change is something that so many youth have been so concerned about for so long, we went to the Portland Public School District, went to those meetings, and we advocated the fact that we need new textbooks explaining how climate change is really, really one of the most detrimental social issues of our time. And that the youth really want this. It's not the teachers telling us that we need to teach this. And having teachers also be very supportive in involving students in these events and movements and getting us out there, also mobilized, also really helps and really contributes to getting youth out there a lot more. Because a lot of youth are really reluctant for going out there by themselves because they think they're the only one going out there. But they know that they have the support of their teachers, of their peers, of the school district also, of getting this climate science practicing out there. And so this past year, Portland's Public School District has been teaching their students a whole unit on climate change, and what's been really beneficial about that is that it's been involved in so many different classes on so many different levels. You got biology class you could be teaching it in, you can teach it in chemistry class, you could teach it in global conflict. There's so many different avenues that you can teach climate change and climate science or climate justice in, and social justice, and intertwine all those things together. And that's how we've really been trying to get climate change and just social justice into the classroom a lot more, because students really want to learn about this, teachers really want to teach about this, and the school district has finally let the students and the teachers be heard.
Right. So also talking about how when you were a 5th grader, Mackenzie, you never heard of the word pesticide before, right? And so how do you feel that social media and pop culture today, I've seen those nice animations about Monsanto and their weed killers, right? You see the nice little flower, and then all of a sudden you see it disappear in nice little lines. But does it really tell us what's going on with those chemicals inside of pesticides and herbicides? And how would you say that mass media and social media and all these outlets portray these chemicals, or don't even inform us about them? How do you think this could be changed?
Yeah, I think it's hard because these companies do get to kids at a really early age. I'm from Hawaii. It's ground zero for industrial agriculture, and Syngenta supplies a lot of the textbook for kids, and purposely so too. Like Monsanto and the big seed corporations employ a lot of local people in the area, and they come in and they talk about their jobs, and Monsanto, now Bayer, has been voted #1 place to work in Hawaii on the Hawaii Business Magazine for so many years in a row. And it's really hard because they get to youth at a really young age, and they're very prevalent in the State Farm Fair and all of those things. I was just driving by in Berkeley the other day, and there's like a bear preschool, which is extremely scary. There's like a preschool attached to the bear headquarters. That freaked me out. And so, but at the same time, you're seeing this movement with organic gardens, which is awesome. And I think that social media could really help us understand what's going on. As long as you're following the right sites and everything. But I think that's how we're all getting a lot of our information. And we've been on Twitter for like so many years in a row, and we're finally like met today. But I think that
Can you repeat the question one more time?
How would you say social media and like news influence on introducing the topic of pesticides or not introducing is affecting children?
So I learned about GMOs first before I learned about pesticides and herbicides, and that kind of intertwined with my knowledge about all that through my mom through middle school, and then learning that all these like big companies that I thought were just really cool and friendly, cool snacks, Cheetos, Doritos, and all that stuff is by funding with seeds from Monsanto and DuPont and all these other pesticide and herbicide companies. And it's really hard to like break that up amongst our generation, I think specifically, because we've grown up with, or many have grown up with Cheetos, like Cheerios, and with seeds, grown up with foods with the seeds of companies like Monsanto. And because that's been so adept and been part of their childhoods, that it's really hard to tear away from that. And personally, I haven't seen a lot of social media or news media outlets talking about Monsanto. But in Oregon, when we were trying to get Bill 92 passed back in 2016 for labeling GMOs, at least labeling GMOs on products, that was really difficult because there's so many anti-GMO companies coming out of the woodwork for no reason and meddling and spreading false information about GMOs, saying that labeling GMOs is going to raise the prices of your products that you use every day. So don't vote for this. And so a lot of my peers also were talking about this at the time, and they at first were against the bill because they're hearing and seeing all these false claims saying that it's going to raise prices just by labeling just non-GMO or GMO on their products. And so there's a lot of rhetoric like pushing for GMO products and not really anti-GMO products. And so it was really hard convincing my peers about GMO products and how in the end they aren't as good as they seem. And seeing in social media too, it wasn't very prevalent either, but it's definitely something that's very influential also in our youth and amongst the youth and amongst everyone, even people on Facebook. Like my parents and my parents' friends are on Facebook, and they're part of the older generation. And so getting little short like snippets on Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, all these other platforms about promoting the labeling of GMOs and promoting not using products with like Roundup Ready, or by promoting or by not promoting the use of GMOs and all that is very important and can be easily spread through social media and has been effective in some states and has been effective in my own experience, also trying to learn a little bit more about GMOs, a little bit more about DuPont, a little bit more about this and that. It's been very important and very prevalent. So yeah.
All right. So
Sorry,
you want to go?
Answer really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I've actually had some really interesting experiences with media and social media. Like, I'm not sure if you know who he is, but Kevin O'Leary is a talk show host. He was originally in Canada and moved to the U.S. He's most known for Shark Tank here, I believe. And on Canadian public television, he said that anyone marching against Monsanto was stupid, and if they didn't like GMOs, they should just stop eating. And at that point, that's when I began to realize the amount that our media is infiltrated. So I decided to publicly challenge him to debate me on national television. The CBC, which is our national broadcast association, had never received more requests to have somebody on any show. And because of that, I was able to go on the show, and millions of views later, things started to change within Canada, within our food system. But I had experiences after that with our media, with social media, that completely changed my view on journalism, that completely changed my view on how our free speech isn't necessarily always that free. I was invited onto a talk show again, on national television, and I was wearing my typical t-shirt, which says, "I'm not a science experiment," labeled GMOs. And I was told that I wasn't allowed to wear that on television because it was too controversial, that as an activist, I shouldn't be allowed to spread my own message. So because of that, they ran around the studio trying to find a blazer to cover up my messages. After that, he started asking very personal questions about my family and how I was influenced as a child to talk about these issues, and how I didn't personally have an opinion on any of it. And later, they didn't air the episode. And it was interesting to me that after I defended my position and was able to provide science and was able to defend why I'm involved and why I care about my future, they still wouldn't air the episode. And with social media, I found out when I was about 16 or so that after the debate came out with Kevin O'Leary, that Kevin Folta, who is paid by Monsanto and many of the biotech corporations, had been planning with Ketchum, which is Monsanto's PR company, on how to destroy my reputation as an activist and as a person. And they were finding ways that they could do this to discredit me and to make me look like a fool, quote unquote, to the public. So it just shows you how influenced our social media is, how influenced our TV and our media channels are, because at the end of the day, you have to look at who's funding these sites, who's funding this media, and a lot of it is corporations. I mean, look at the commercials. It's funded by Pfizer, it's funded by Bayer, it is funded by Monsanto, and then we have to realize, they're not going to go against advertisers. And even with social media, the amount of campaigns each of us have faced as activists are incredible. We constantly have people going after us who are paid trolls simply to go against our messages and to make us not credible in the public eye. So it is an interesting tool, and it can be very positive. So to add a positive spin to this, social media can be an incredible tool, and we've all used it to connect, and none of us would be on the platform that we are without social media. We've all used it to connect with each other and to be able to create social change. So we're lucky, we just need to use it in positive ways.
So yes, although social media is a good tool to get organized, we have to be critical about how these algorithms actually are using us, right? So, you feel me? These algorithms were actually created to control our actions and control our actual time that we spend on our phones, being exposed to harmful EMF radiation, and being poisoned, or having our minds poisoned by content and indoctrination stuff that's sponsored content by companies and stuff like that. So we have to be critical of that as youth. But what's crazy is that youth that's younger, that's maybe like 8 years old and younger, are already addicted to phones, are already addicted to these media platforms and stuff like that, and they don't even really know what's going on, which is sad to see. Young babies sleeping next to iPads, young toddlers, using iPhones and looking at the detrimental effects that these iPhones are actually having on the youth and then on us is something that we have to critique as youth and begin to reject. And still find a way to connect outside of that, because a lot of these social media platforms are tapped, are being monitored and watched by the state and by these corporations who control the state. So we just have to be very mindful of how we navigate on social media and what we put on social media, just because of how dangerous it can be, as you can hear from, our panelists, like what people have been through. So that's just pretty much what I wanted to say about that.
Thank you for what you said. It's really great to teach kids like what pesticides are and what GMOs are and their harmful effects, but why don't we start teaching kids to be in the garden, start to learn how to grow the crops and then build from there, like hands-on experience, right? Most babies learn how to find shapes, with vegetables and like toys. Nowadays, you have the chew toys that are all plastic and foam, and I don't think babies like that. It's plastic, artificial, Most kids use like zucchinis or like bananas and stuff. And that's a healthier version of toys, But how do you guys think that we could involve our kids in the ground up community building, like gardens and backyard garden boxes and little plants and whatnot?
Yeah, so I'll just start on that and say that a lot of times, particularly with African and indigenous youth, there's a lot of trauma surrounding land, and there's a lot of trauma surrounding farming because of slavery and genocide, right, that happened on the land. So when I talk to African kids and I talk to, black kids, like, y'all trying to come farm, y'all trying to come to the farm, they're like, nah, that's some slave shit, to keep it stacked. Like, that's what they're thinking. That's what their mindset is, because all they learn in the schools is how Africans were 3/5 of human beings and how Africans worked the land, and the white folks watched them do it and, inflicted all this violence onto these kids. So a lot of that is actually teaching these children the true history of what actually happened, and how our ancestors were the ones who created a lot of these agricultural systems that are climate resilient and resistant to climate change, right? The South Carolina and the North Carolina rice industries, were created by African people from African seeds that were brought over the Atlantic through the transatlantic slave trade, that were braided into African women's hair, and doing that and teaching them those histories and teaching them about George Washington Carver was the original regenerative agriculturist, you feel me, and the original agroecologist, and teaching our kids that, we weren't always slaves, we weren't always oppressed, we weren't always living in projects, we weren't always confined to urban centers and living in apartments, So those are some of the things that we're trying to teach youth right now, and it's been super effective. And we're trying to make farming something cool to do. We're trying to make farming a social movement that's actually going to bring liberation to people, and that's been effective. So that's what we've been doing.
5 minutes.
So I'll keep it short because I know we're running out of time, but I think, it's been said time and time again, it has to start with the seed, it has to start with understanding from a young age, and I personally fell in love with nature simply by learning about one single seed, and so being hands-on and bringing these programs and resources to schools and showing kids and being hands-on with, taking the weeds out and not using chemicals and not using pesticides. These are all small things that at the end of the day make a huge difference to kids, whether you realize it or not. And it's starting with your own family, starting with the people that you know, and expanding that, telling people to plant a single seed in a cup is what teaches kids about the miracle of life, the miracle of growing your own food and understanding where your food comes from and making that connection between what's on your plate and who grew it. And so connecting that circle and understanding it all is incredibly important. And I think that starts off with protecting our seeds and seed saving, which is one of the most radical and important actions we can take in this day and age.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we all know that maybe our purchasing power is it's not gonna change the food system radically, or even growing this one thing, it's not gonna change everything, but it's such a visceral way to start with what you put into your own body. Growing your own food can be such a great place to bring people into this movement. And I was just at the Children's Detention Center in San Francisco the other day with my friend Mary, because her brother teaches there, and they have an organic garden for the kids, and I think there's a lot of work that can be done there, but I thought it was really cool to see that they at least bring kids outside and get them gardening. And so yeah, I thought that's awesome. And again, I just echo everything you guys said. Yeah.
I just want to say something really quick to touch on this subject. Have you guys all heard about food deserts? So that's also something that's very predominant in like many minority communities and communities of color, is that there aren't places you could access for even a space to build a garden, or even food around the corner to purchase that is like a fresh fruit. Like it being a peach or an apple or banana or spinach or some vegetables. Stores charge higher prices for fresh fruit and vegetables and make non-perishable foods, quick, easy foods, Top Ramen, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, really inexpensive. And they also make water more expensive. And so these communities of color who tend to have lower incomes, tend to have lower incomes, they have to resort to purchasing Top Ramen on a frequent basis because that's all they can afford, because spinach is too expensive. They want to buy spinach, they want to buy lettuce, but they can't buy any of that or much of that because it's just too damn expensive. That's just what I wanted.
Right. Well, thank you guys very much. That was a very wonderful panel. I hope to hear more from you guys later. But we do have a few minutes for questions. If you guys want to start, is there a microphone? Yeah, you can just.
What is one thing that you are optimistic about?
The question was, what is one thing that we are optimistic for in the future? And well, one thing that I find very optimistic is the intergenerational connect that we've had. Recently, we've had a ton of youth being involved in the climate movement, and before youth started getting really involved, we had the older generations being active in the climate movement. And so seeing this new era in 2019, 2020, seeing these two generations combine to create even greater force to combat these big companies and corporations, Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, and everything else that has to do with that. It makes me very hopeful for the future, because there's always been it's that generation's fault, the older generation's fault for polluting, the younger generation's fault for not being active in politics, and this and that, tit for tat. But I'm looking very forward to in the future seeing this intergenerational connect rather than intergenerational divide.
One thing that makes me hopeful for the future is to see our politicians finally talking about climate change and regenerative agriculture, and that's so much in part to these youth movements, and people like Isaac and his group, and Juliana versus the United States is amazing, and groups like the Sunrise Movement. And I think like food deserts are going to exist unless we can fight for higher minimum wages and fight for more land and fight for better policies in our Farm Bill and for the Green New Deal and everything like that. And so to see more people engaged in policy on local and federal level is exciting, and I think we just need to keep pushing our politicians to talk more about what we want and fight for what we want. And that's been huge by the youth. It's been a huge youth-led movement to even get those conversations going.
I think what gives me hope is conversations like this, where I can learn from other people, and at the end of the day, I know that it's this continued conversation and this idea that we can all share information and be able to spread it throughout movements, and even movements that we're not talking about regenerative agriculture, we're not talking about food, weren't talking about the root causes of the issues, are now waking up to see that, our food movement is, the food issue that we have right now is causing the Amazon to burn. The food issue that we have right now is creating the problem with food deserts and inequality, and we have all of these different aspects, and finally everybody is starting to wake up and realize and seeing how the climate movement is also jumping on with the food movement. So seeing this collaboration, I think, between everybody, regardless of what background, regardless of where you live in the world, seeing us all come together to try and create change is giving me a lot of hope recently.
I'm optimistic about the movement for reparations, how that's gaining traction, right? So basically, African people have been the only people not to receive compensation for our enslavement or our oppression, right? So the Japanese folks got compensated with $30,000 and plus after they were interned during World War II. The indigenous people got some land back from the state, but African people endured over 400 years of slavery and still have not received $1 or 1 cent, right? So if we think about that, we need to get our check. And so we got people actually talking about that now. You know, we got Bernie Sanders getting interviewed on BET by Mark Lamont Hill talking about reparations. We got people really making this move. I'm out here talking about it like we collected $300 from y'all this morning. You feel me? So that's what I'm looking forward to and gaining traction for the reparations movement and making people think and making people know that that's something that's required if we're going to try to solve this climate crisis. Because the climate crisis was created by colonialism, right? So as soon as the Christopher Columbus and all of these colonial systems came over to Turtle Island and started extracting land recklessly, destroying natural resources, exploiting indigenous people, and forcing it into this market-based economy, that's when all of the climatic destruction and stuff like that started to kick off. So if we look at it from that perspective, then that is the way how we move forward. We have to reverse those things that happen. So let's pay up.
All right. So I assume there's some really good questions out there, but that's all the time we have for right now. If you guys
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you want to, reparations look different. You feel me? We're taking Black Earth Farms is trying to build up our library right now. So if you want to buy us a book and a donation in the back and get us some literature so we can educate our community, you could do that. Or you can, write us a check. Do whatever you want. Just come see me afterward. We could talk.
Thank you very much. That was a very wonderful discussion.